Hi, I'm Wyatt Cash, Vice President of Content Strategy for FedScoop, and we're here today at the ACT Executive Leadership Conference in Williamsburg with Maria Roat, who is the Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Department of Transportation, to talk about emerging technologies, innovation, and some of the other themes at our conference. So welcome, Maria. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I'd like to open first with you just came back with a discussion upstairs about innovation and emerging technologies. Tell us a little bit about how some of these technologies are helping agencies improve their services or maybe reducing risks.
So in the transportation space, there's a lot going on when you start talking about connected cities, connected vehicles, a lot of research, a lot of testing that's going on. And really what that's driving to is safety for the driver, of course. So, you know, when somebody in front of you hits the brakes, you know, the automated sensors so you don't crash into them. But when you look at the whole space of connected cities and connected intersections, there's a whole sector of systems around transportation, and people don't think about transportation as a system of systems. So you've got connected intersections, connected cars in Southeast Michigan. There's a test bed that's been going on, and in 6 months, there's about 88.5 million data points, information pieces that are coming out of those intersections, another 12.5 million coming out of the cars. And what that really generates to is about 19 messages in about 5 minutes to the driver. So about every 15 seconds, you could potentially get some kind of notification. You know, there's ice on the bridge, or there's an accident ahead, and you may want to recalibrate your trip or do something else. So really taking all of those pieces and that information into consideration, and what do you need as a driver? Now take that on a national scale, and how do we start standardizing all of that across not just the country but the continent, so that, you know, everybody's driving on the right side of the road, that we have red you know, octagons for the stop signs. But how do we translate that into, you know, this different space of working with data and all the sensors and everything talking to each other? And how do we get to those standards so that you can, as a driver, as a consumer, get the information you want when you need it?
Sounds exciting. Sounds like a lot of data. How is the department funding some of these pilots and being able to help states and localities work with all this data?
So Department of Transportation has a lot of grants, a lot of partnerships with industry and academia. So when you look at some of the cities who have big universities in their backyard, certainly we have University of Maryland and all the rest of the universities in the DC space, but you have, you know, South Bend, Indiana, and you've got Pittsburgh and others that have big universities. So there's a lot of partnerships that go on, as well as the grants and for research activities and what industry can bring to the table, as well as the rest of the community. So there's a lot of innovation going on, and the funding is going towards a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, switching subjects a little to security. So one of the questions is, as we have more sensors and data and drones and so forth, how are you planning to assess the security risks and trying to take the appropriate steps to make sure the security is in place for all this data?
So the security, you know, some of that starts from the sensors themselves. So when you talk about manufacturing, you have a convergence of IoT and IT now, right? So you have OT, operational technologies, you know, all of your infrastructure, as well as the IT component and that convergence. And when you start looking at the risk and the security with that, how do people update their sensors? How do they keep those maintained? How do you keep the software levels current so that there's patches? And it goes to some of the configuration management aspects that, you know, somebody may come up with a sensor or a piece of hardware. Well, are they going to keep that up to date, and how are they going to keep the software on that upgraded and to address those security risks? And then when you have the data piece of it, how do you start building security into the data? Because, you know, while you may allow someone to have the geospatial or location data off your phone or for where you are so that you can get those real-time messages that you need, how much are you willing to share, and how do you wrap security around that data? So those are some of the things that working with industry and our partners, and how do we do that? And I don't think anybody has the answer to that. And then when you start building in the algorithms that tie all these things together to make the smart decisions so you get the message you want, wow, that security piece of it it's something that needs to be looked at, because how much are you willing to give up to get the information you need as well?
Yeah, a lot of articles about the potential problems with that.
Yeah, so you have security on one hand with the sensors,
Yes.
you know, with the hardware and the software piece of it, but you're also dealing with security around the data space with you as a consumer.
That's right, that's right. Well, another subject is FITARA. I'm wondering how FITARA and just the ability to get better visibility on information projects, how are you seeing that impacting the Department of Transportation?
So within the department, there's, you know, you have federal railroads, and you have highways and FTA, and you have a lot of projects that are going on. And what FITARA has really helped with is starting to give us the insight into some of the projects and the activities that are going on in the department, and how we can pull that information together. So when you have, you know, whether it's railroad, transit, you know, pipelines, and you have these silos of data, and what FITARA is doing is giving us insight to what those investments are, so that we can pull that together and start overlaying all this information from these different modes of transportation to address those safety issues. To really look at it, and how do we put demographic information over the top of that, and how do we tie all that in so that we're looking at our data and our investments that generate this data from a multimodal perspective, and that's really feeding a broader, you know, certainly transportation's about safety, and how do we get that information up so we look at it differently.
Wow. Lastly, what projects are you working on that you're excited about in the year ahead?
Oh, I think there's about 6. I've talked a little bit about the connected vehicles and the connected city space.
Yes.
I like where that's going. I think that's just really cool. Just a ton of opportunities. I was out on the West Coast a few weeks ago talking to a lot of small business and incubators and venture capitalists, and about what's going on in that space with transportation. It's not just transportation with a car, it's connecting the cities and all the aspects of it. So it's really, it's a really neat time to be in transportation and seeing how this is evolving.
Well, it's going to be one to keep watching for a while.
It will.
Well, Maria, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your being with us. I'm Wyatt Cash with FedScoop. You can see more of our coverage on fedscoop.com. Thanks for being with us.